Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ubel, and I am a senior member of the Student Alumni Association, as well as an intern in the Alumni Relations Office. I'm excited to welcome you to our Nova Network webinar, The Creativity Imperative: What is Innovative Thinking and Why is it Necessary for Today's Individuals and Organizations? Today, we are fortunate enough to have with us Patrick G. Maggitti, PhD, the Helen and William O'Toole Dean at the Villanova School of Business. Dean Maggitti is also Associate Professor of Strategic Management and Entrepreneurship and the former Carmen and Sharon Donella Director and founder of the Center for Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship, known as the ICE Center at VSB. Prior to joining VSB's faculty in 2008, Dean Maggitti was a faculty member at both Temple and St. Joseph's Universities. Dean Maggitti is a widely recognized scholar in the areas of entrepreneurship and strategic management. His research interests focus on dynamic processes, including strategy, innovation, entrepreneurship, decision-making, search behavior, and market and non-market-based competition. Dean Maggitti received a BS in chemistry from St. Joseph's University, an MBA with high honors from the Johns Hopkins University, and a PhD in strategic management from the University of Maryland. So without further ado, I will hand over our webinar to Dean Maggitti.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm, on one hand, sorry that I can't hear everyone out there. On the other hand, it's the first time that I had the pleasure of being introduced as someone who graduated from St. Joe's without having to hear the collective sigh of all you Villanovans in the audience. So I enjoyed that a little bit, I must admit. Thank you all for joining me today. This is my first opportunity or my first step into this webinar space, and so I'm looking forward to this. I want to thank Stephanie and Kim, who are here on the technology side, and Kathy Toner from my office, who are operating the controls and got me prepared for today. We are going to have some questions at the end, and I know there's a questions box on the platform, so you can feel free to enter those in as we move along, and we'll pull some off at the end and answer any questions you might have. And so with that, without further ado, I'll launch into the presentation today, talk a little bit about creativity. This is an area of interest of mine personally, and something I think that is on the forefront of so many organizations, talking about creativity, the types of people they want, creative problem solvers. It's something that we integrate into the Villanova School of Business experience for our students, ensuring that our students have the opportunity to work on real-world problems, solve real-world problems, and come up with great solutions, and hopefully can be the leaders of the world tomorrow. So I'd like to start with this short exercise. Since I can't see you, I don't know if people are actually trying this, but if you could take a piece of paper and put 9 dots on it, as I've shown here, this exercise asks you to draw 4 straight lines to connect all 9 of these dots. And so I'll give 20 seconds or so to see if anyone can put that together. Okay, time's up. So I will release the answer here to see if anyone was able to draw 4 straight lines and connect all 9 of those dots. So I'm sure that there are some stellar students out there who was able to do that. But it's an interesting exercise, and you could probably guess the name of this exercise. It's called Thinking Outside of the Box. And that's essentially what we're talking about today. We're talking about creative problem solving and providing opportunities, looking at why it's so important to be able to think outside the box, how you might foster that in yourself and others. That's the thrust of today's discussion. So let's talk a little bit about creativity and problem solving and innovation, how all these things fit together. So as Stephanie mentioned, several years back we founded here at VSB the Center for Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship. And that wasn't only a catchy name, the ICE Center, but there's actually a model that went into that, the founding of that operation or that initiative. And it was based on some of the work that I had done at other universities in entrepreneurship, where a typical entrepreneurship center at a university focused on the startups and startup organizations, the foundings of entrepreneurial firms, there seemed to be less opportunity to talk about people who weren't starting businesses and how entrepreneurial thinking or entrepreneurial skills might go into existing business, not-for-profit businesses, frankly, organizations like Villanova. And so the model for the center started with creativity being the raw materials of a new idea, and innovation is defined as some new idea that has a particular value, and that value can be economic, it can be social value to someone, psychological value, and then taking action. Entrepreneurship in this model was nothing more than taking action. And so from using this as the basis for the ICE Center and for what we're going to discuss today, you can see that entrepreneurship is more than just starting a business. It's taking action on some new idea that you believe or that someone believes or that an organization believes has value. And so when we put all those three concepts together, entrepreneurial thinking is a concept of import, again, not just for a new startup. So this idea transcends new businesses, and it's important for a lot of reasons. Today we're going to talk about how we might, as individuals, become more entrepreneurial in the way we think and what goes into ideas, idea generation and innovation. But then also, as I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about developing entrepreneurial thinking in others. So for those of you that are in managerial positions or working as part of a team, or frankly, again, back to Villanova, and I'm happy to get Villanova-specific questions around this topic. But here at Villanova, this is an area of real importance. Our industry is just as uncertain, just as competitive, and sometimes more so than many of those that aren't in higher ed. And so maintaining currency in the marketplace and being innovative is a part and parcel of what we're doing, I think, right now at Villanova more so than ever. So developing and supporting entrepreneurial thinking right here on this campus is something that I spend a lot of my time thinking about, and I know our leadership does as well. So some interesting statistics along these lines. There was a survey a couple years ago of Fortune 500 CEOs, and 60%, nearly 60% said that creative problem solving or creativity was a more important characteristic than intelligence. That's a pretty powerful statistic in my opinion. Another survey of the Gallup did show that 96% of hiring managers believe that the American workforce must become entrepreneurial. So if you buy into this model that I put forth of creativity and entrepreneurship being inextricably linked, then these two things are very similar. We're finding that management, that companies are looking for folks that can be creative or entrepreneurial, someone that comes up with ideas and takes action within an organization. Some other things I think to think about along those lines. Actually, I think I might be out of order here on some slides. Just another backup in terms of statistics and proof that this is an issue in today's organizations. IBM does a study every other year of CEOs. The last time this was done, of these 1,500 CEOs, creativity came up as the #1 most cited important leadership quality over the next 5 years. That is different than about 10 years ago, global thinking was #1. And as you can see this, creativity at 60% is a more important characteristic than even humility or fairness, openness, influence, global thinking. So it is absolutely the case that more and more organizations are valuing the ability to be creative and find new ideas. Some other trends that I would highlight and why this is such a current topic of discussion. One is pretty obvious. The nature of employment and the employment contract has changed over years. So I'm sure many of you out there had parents or grandparents that worked for the same organization for 40 years. I know, when in my prior life, I sold valves and pumps into the steel industry, and that was an aging industry. It was nothing for us to have a retirement party for someone who had worked in the steel business for 50 years or more. But that is no longer the case. So individuals now hop from job to job at a much faster clip. It's almost unheard of to have one graduate still be at the same place of employment 20, 25 years out. And it forces individuals to think more about their career in terms of their own business, your own personal brand and how you market yourself for your next career opportunity or job opportunity. So that's a trend that has forced individuals to think more like entrepreneurs. Also, digitization, technology, the shrinking world have really had an effect on quantitative type occupations, occupations that can be codified. These types of disciplines can literally, a lot of the number crunching and aspects of these can be offloaded to technology. And so it means that if you're an engineer, if you're in the sciences in some cases, if you're a mathematician, that some of the things that would have got you a terrific occupation or 20, 30 years ago are automated now. And it means that you have to be able to justify your very existence in terms of knowing what to do with the information and the data. Here in VSB, we've had an incredible success launching programs in business analytics. And so as part of an analytics degree, our Masters of Science in Analytics, for example, which we started an online Masters of Science in Analytics this fall that we're very excited about. It teaches those students how to deal with data, but more importantly, it helps them understand how they can use that data to make better decisions. So it's not so much the quantitative aspect, it's the interpretation of that data and using it to come up with creative solutions to problems. There's also a movement in corporate America towards higher levels of just flat-out entrepreneurial expectations of employees, or intrapreneurship. Companies like W.L. Gore, the people who make Gore-Tex, Google, 3M, etc., they ask of their employees to spend 20% of their time or more thinking of new ideas, new projects, and being entrepreneurial within those very firms. So we see tremendous trends driving individuals towards thinking about being entrepreneurial in their thinking, coming up with new ideas, advancing them, championing them within their organizations, and taking action on them. There's another reason why ideas are so important, or the ability to come up with ideas is so important. Ideas are essentially free. They're a limitless resource. So unlike these other factors of production like land, labor, and capital that you learned, I'm sure, in your econ class when you were here in Villanova, ideas are not a scarce resource. That's an important aspect, so we can have a limitless opportunity. If you look at that last bullet point, it's a good thing they aren't, because the best data that we have shows that it takes up to 3,000 raw ideas to come up with one successful product. Yet despite the fact that the demands of ideation and new idea generation are so vast, it is the case that businesses rely on these new ideas. By some estimates, 1/3 of profits and sales, as that third bullet point indicates, are driven by new ideas, new products, and new services. So constantly renewing yourself in an organization or in a business is very, very important. So let's just talk a little bit about innovation. So we talked about ideas, and I've linked them to innovations as being something that is of value, that there is a particular value. And we look about innovation as different types and different degrees. So in a classical sense, innovation can be a new product, it can be a new service, it can be some type of new process, or new sources of raw materials, new types of raw materials, or even new ways of organizing. Close by to Villanova, DuPont is known for their organizational structure as being one of the biggest innovations in organizations, really, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Innovation can also vary to the extent that there are different degrees of innovation. I'm going to talk a little bit about these because there's some misnomers about these. For example, imitation globally has become an issue for the U.S. competitively. A lot of countries and folks in foreign markets have copied much of the innovation that's going on in the U.S., but we don't think of that as really as innovation at all. And there's some question to the extent that some of these countries are able to innovate like we are in the United States. We hope, if we're looking at our own country, that we might have some type of differentiating competency in innovation because of the way that our economy has grown. Incremental innovation builds builds incrementally upon the technologies that come before it. Radical innovation is something you may hear of quite a bit, something very, very new and interesting. And disruptive innovation, which is the concept that is most often bandied about with not full appreciation for what it exactly means. So let's just look a little quickly at radical versus incremental innovation. This is basically two ends of a continuum. So incremental innovation continues a current technology. Sometimes I like to think, for some reason I'm always thinking about Microsoft Word as a product. You know, you start off with being able to have 10 fonts and then 20 fonts and then thousands and thousands of fonts, for example, as incremental innovations for Microsoft Word. So it exploits existing types of technology. There's not much risk of failure when you're incrementally advancing the technology innovation-wise of a particular product or service. But as a result, the rewards are fairly small. Whereas radical innovation really does bring about new ideas, new concepts, new technologies to an existing product, and oftentimes will eclipse an existing product. But with radical innovation, sometimes there isn't a marketplace. For example, some of you may remember Apple's first foray into handheld devices was a product called the Apple Newton. And it was very similar to the Palm Pilot and even had some similarities to iPhones. But the marketplace was not ready for the Apple Newton back in the 80s and 90s when that was launched, and it was a complete failure. So it was very radical, but it did fail, that particular product. So we have this continuum of radical versus incremental innovation, and as I mentioned, Microsoft is something I pick on there. If you think about Windows, back in the day, went from Windows 95 to Windows 98. Those of you that might be able to remember Intel, your computer was a 286, then a 386, then a 486, all very incremental, similar technologies. More radical, obviously, was a light bulb, something that was completely new, or the printing press. Or as I mentioned, DuPont's, the multi-divisional structure at DuPont is something that was a huge organizational innovation, as was the jet engine. Nothing like it. There was nothing incremental about the jet engine. We went from one type of technology in props or propellers to something completely new. Disruptive innovation I think is one of the most exciting areas to think about in your own organization, and we think about it here in particular in higher ed. So disruptive innovation is a simple concept, but it's once you understand it, but it's a little complicated at first. So I put together this chart, or this graph that demonstrates exactly what we mean by disruptive innovation in the specific sense. So two axes. One is product performance. You could think of that as the types of features and products, features and benefits that a particular product has over time. And if we graph out, or if we show in one part of this, I'm going to try to use my cursor, see if I can point to this myself. If there's a particular marketplace, the individuals or the consumers might have a certain demand for a particular level of product performance. And that expectation of performance increases over time. And so there's a performance level that's demanded by the users at the most simple end of the marketplace, and there's a performance level that's demanded at the top end of the marketplace. So let's use as an example the Microsoft Word example. Back when Microsoft Word was started, it had a fewer level of fonts. It had very few capabilities, let's say. But for the vast majority of the marketplace, the bottom end of the marketplace, I should say, those features and benefits were plenty good. Now maybe here at the high end you might have had printers, you might have had folks that were movable type or newspapers. Maybe Microsoft Word wasn't good enough for them. But for most of the marketplace, that particular item was good. So if this is the average demand of performance, there was a big, when the technological innovation of Microsoft Word was here, 50% roughly, or half the marketplace, had qualities of performance that they were pleased with. But as Microsoft increases the capabilities of Microsoft Word, so Microsoft Word is adding functionality, it's adding track changes, It's adding the ability to compare documents. It's adding all kinds of features and benefits. It doesn't take long for that incremental innovation to exceed what is demanded by the marketplace, such that you get this gap. You have a product that technologically outstrips what the marketplace, even at the top end, really wants. And so you're paying $400 for an item for Microsoft Word when really no one is using. In some cases, there's estimates that we don't use 90% of the capabilities of Microsoft Word, even at the top end of the marketplace. So you're paying for that innovation that Microsoft keeps advancing down the line with Microsoft Word, even though the average part of the market and even the top end don't need it. Now down here, in terms of word processing, this is my mom's curve. We'll call this down here. She doesn't need almost any of the opportunities or any of the functionality of Microsoft Word. And so in comes a product like OpenOffice or Google Docs. It is an absolutely inferior product, right? If we're looking at product performance and we look at this line versus the Microsoft Word line, you can see this is an inferior product. But at this point of time, it's plenty good for users at the bottom end of the marketplace. And as it increases functionality, it's even good for a vast majority of the marketplace. So as disruptive innovation is something that is truly inferior to the current technology, but yet is perfectly great for so many people in the marketplace. And I think that that's a really interesting concept. Industry is fraught with these. There's a guy named Clayton Christensen who's a faculty member at Harvard who is the founder of this concept. And he came up with this idea when he was looking at disk drives. And so maybe some of you remember 14-inch floppy disks and you know how large they were. And it turns out that all the companies that made 14-inch floppy disk drives made them very well, and they kept getting better and better and better. And they ignored the fact that there was a whole other set of manufacturers making 8-inch disk drives, because the 8-inch disk drives held less, they were slower, they were literally inferior to the 14-inch, until the quality of the 8-inch became such that it was good enough for vast amounts of the marketplace. And every one of the 14-inch manufacturers went out of business in favor of the 8-inch disk drive manufacturers. So the 8-inch disk drive manufacturers, what did they do? They started really increasing the capacity of their 8-inch drives, the speed of their 8-inch drives, and ignored the fact that there was another set of manufacturers that started honing in on an inferior product, the 5.25-inch disk drive. And lo and behold, without noticing what was going on, the 5.25 became a little bit better and such that it was great for a home user. Maybe it wasn't good enough for corporate America, who would have still been using the 8-inch drives. But ultimately, all the 8-inch manufacturers went out of business due to this, at first, inferior technology that they ignored, and so on. So Christensen saw this in the disk drive industry. He saw it in the steel industry, where integrated steel mills ignored companies like Nucor, who had electric arc furnaces that produced an absolutely inferior grade of steel. But they were able to use that kind of steel for rebar or for the low-end part of the market, until Nucor started getting a little bit better and better at their technology. By that point, the large steel industry companies, the Bethlehem Steels of the world, U.S. Steels of the world, were caught unaware, and we see what happened to that industry. So good examples of disruptive technology right now are minute clinics. Minute clinics are absolutely inferior to hospitals and to emergency rooms, but yet for 95% of the cases that walk in there, they are plenty good. And so the same thing happened with digital photography. What happened to Kodak? Kodak for years railed against digital photography because it was inferior, but yet it was good enough for taking a quick picture of your kid or some event, and now Kodak was caught completely unaware, completely incapable of dealing with that disruptive technology. So I think this is such an interesting concept to me because you can see it over and over again. LED bulbs now are something that was inferior initially and now are taking over the marketplace. LCD screens were inferior and now have risen. So when we talk about this in organizations or from doing any consulting work, it's imperative to look at the junk, the bad stuff that's going on in your industry, and make sure you understand what that might do to disrupt your current business model. In our case, in higher ed, we look at online education. So although we are prone to look down our noses at the University of Phoenixes of the world, perhaps, or other types of offerings, especially back 10 years ago when distance education meant you were mailed a bunch of DVDs, and before that, VCR tapes. Now we need to take this stuff very, very seriously because it could be something that would disrupt us. So moving ahead a little bit, let's talk. We've talked about why ideas are so important. We talked about innovation and how innovation is related to ideas. Where do ideas come from? I've done some writing on a topic. It's called bisociation. And the premise of this bisociation is that all new ideas come from the intersection point of other ideas. There is no such thing truly as a new idea. And in fact, the best ideas come from areas or ideas that seem to be unrelated. So bisociation is a concept through which two seemingly unrelated matrices of thought are combined into a novel outcome. And a great example, my favorite example of this is the printing press. So Gutenberg, on one hand, saw the need to copy Bibles and other books. And also, on the other hand, was fond of wine and making wine. And so the collision point of the winemaking process and the wine press and the need to copy books was the perfect bisociation of two seemingly unrelated ideas that resulted in perhaps one of the greatest inventions of the New Ages. The light bulb. Thomas Edison brought together heat and monofilament thread technology and in a very obviously transformational way. The telephone brought sound waves together with electricity, etc. And so every single idea comes from the collision point of others. I think it might have been Einstein that said about on the shoulders of giants is where ideas come from. And it truly is the case that we find ideas either at the collision point or building upon what has come before. And that's an important aspect of what we're about to talk about, is how we might be able to foster more ideas in ourselves and in others. So the traditional model of entrepreneurial ideas within an organization have been that they have come from the top. More and more, as I mentioned earlier, companies are expecting their employees to have a bottom-up approach, to think about new ideas where they might come from. And we find that ideas come from three areas, intersecting areas: expertise of individuals, their ability to think creatively, and their motivation to do so. So these are all individual characteristics, but they can, to varying degrees, be influenced by managers. So let's talk a little bit about, let's go back to bisociation and how this relates to this concept. So if bisociation is the mechanism through which new ideas come from, the extent to which we can increase collision points is a way that we can increase ideation or new ideas. And so one way of doing that is developing expertise. Here at Villanova, I think we have a competitive advantage in the marketplace because we provide such a well-rounded education. So even in the business school, 50% of the courses that students take are in arts and sciences. And that breadth of knowledge, that well-rounded education you receive here, enables our students to find a more varied set of collision points. Study abroad is important for this. Internships, co-ops, new experiences, new knowledge, new training increase your expertise and enable you to draw from a more varied set of experiences and knowledge points to collide them in unique ways. So increasing what you know, increasing the scope of what you know is one way of increasing your bisociative capabilities. But also thinking about these types of things. How do you drive these collision points together? So there is evidence that sessions like today, just even talking about what it takes to make better decisions, to be creative, drive our ability to create, to be creative. So this session like today, this is the impetus for brainstorming sessions. One of my favorites is using a devil's advocate, forcing people to look at an idea, look at something from a countervailing viewpoint, These types of processes really do develop better skills, better abilities to come up with new ideas. In terms of motivation, this is where there's a lot of discussion in the literature on, the extent to which some people are just more creative than others. But if you believe the argument that I'm putting forth here, you believe that maybe some individuals do have a certain stock of creativity, right? Like an artist would have a stock of creativity, but it can be fostered and honed and motivated. There would be no art schools if you couldn't teach creative outcomes, or at least increase the ability of an individual to be creative. And this is where we can have an effect on others as well. So there's a number of ways to increase the motivation and the ability of folks to be creative. One is challenge. So we know that the number one way to increase motivation and the ability of individuals to set challenging goals. There's a theory called goal theory that is probably the most tested and also the most well supported in all of management literature, that people with specific and difficult but measurable goals outperform those that don't. Sometimes you might hear of an acronym, SMART goals. SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-oriented goals really do drive performance, and it's no different when it comes to being creative. So setting up challenging goals is the most important thing that we can do for our team. Giving people the freedom to think creatively, though, is also important. So managers can pick the goal, but it's much better if teams come up with their own goals, if they can set their own goals and have the freedom to achieve those. So, some of the downsides of management can be changing goals often, moving the goal post on a team or an individual. So to the extent that individuals can be involved in the goal-setting process and also have clearly articulated goals and the freedom to reach them, it's very important. Resources. Two main resources that increase creative outcomes are time and money. Time might even be more important than money, and time's interesting because oftentimes a time crunch can be a good thing. But setting fake goals or impossible goals is very counterproductive. The research shows that that can have a really deleterious impact on the ability of individuals to be creative. So having enough resources is important, but not having too many or having an excess doesn't necessarily lead to more creative outcomes. Another aspect of this that you might find interesting is that the research shows that physical space is very important. And sometimes it's overemphasized if we look at Silicon Valley companies or high-tech companies who really look at having creative spaces. The only linkage appears to be that comfortable offices are important, and so is a creative atmosphere. But fitting a person to an assignment, fitting someone who believes in the goal is much more important than any physical space that one can develop. The work group, the type of features, a mutually supportive environment, and also bringing together diverse teams. So the work group has a lot to do with creative outcomes. And it makes sense if you go back and think about what bisociation is. So I talked about bisociation within an individual. But this is a great economic argument for diversity amongst teams. The more diverse a team is, the more likely we are bringing a variety of viewpoints, a variety of knowledge bases, and we might increase the originality of the collision points that we come up with. And it is shown that highly diverse teams do come up with more creative outcomes. But supporting that, having a team that's willing to recognize each other's own knowledge, their skills, their abilities is so important. But managers can absolutely kill creativity when they put together teams in an effort to reach fast decisions or to avoid any conflict. Conflict, and I've written on this topic and I've done research on it, conflict can be a very healthy thing in an organization. It's only when conflict evolves into personal sort of personal attacks or personal conflict that it's unhealthy. Otherwise, debate, conflict, discussion is incredibly functional for teams, whether they're making decisions or whether they're trying to come up with creative outcomes. And finally, as a supervisor, it's so important. It's so important to enable people the ability and support their efforts to be creative, to be innovative, and to come up with new ideas. We have such a norm in organizations where somebody comes up with a new idea and we attack that or we critique it immediately. And so it's difficult sometimes to just let things percolate or to discuss an item, and instead of criticizing something negatively, to think about how we might make something better. It's far easier. Sometimes we use this as a mechanism of making ourselves look smarter if we are critiquing someone else's outcome. But there are reasons to believe that we should support all kinds of innovative ideas and also support failure. This is a very difficult thing to do in a profit-driven company or in any organization that's looking for particular outcomes. When we saw there's 3,000 ideas for every good one, it means there's going to be a lot of failure, and we have to promote that. Otherwise, we might stifle the type of culture that we're trying to build to foster, creative ideas and the acceptance of new ideas. I think that I hit all my points here. I think I might have skipped one. Oh, I did want to mention one other thing. So in terms of organizational support in this last bullet, there's a lot of crossover between organizational support and the supervisor's role here. But it's interesting that the research showing, looking at creativity, doesn't find a very clear linkage between monetary rewards and creativity. In fact, there is some reason to believe that the higher the monetary reward, the smaller the creative outcome. So while there is the reason to incentivize sometimes high levels of monetary rewards for creativity can be counterproductive, especially since it's often tied to a lack of monetary reward for negative outcomes. So just to circle back and close out the session, and then we'll open it up to questions. Let's just recap where we have been. So entrepreneurial thinking, this notion of ideas, creativity, creative problem solving, entrepreneurial thinking, I lump them all together as a very, very similar and related and concepts that are not mutually exclusive and are dependent on one another. It's entrepreneurial thinking is a concept that doesn't just have to do with startup organizations. It's important for individuals to understand. It's important for organizations to understand. Bisociation is an interesting idea. If you purposefully look for collision points, it provides an interesting outcome for whatever the problem is that you might be facing or the challenge that is in front of you. Look for all types of innovations. We went over those types of innovations, the imitation and incremental and radical and disruptive. All of those can be very innovative. They can be very valuable in their own way. And I particularly encourage you at this time and place of such high levels of technological advance that you look beneath the surface at things that might appear initially to be inferior to the current technology in whatever field that you're in. Managers can influence their own ability to be creative, and they can also influence others, motivate them to be more creative. And cultures really do matter. Having a supportive ecosystem, one that rewards failure in many cases, can be extremely valuable in terms of creativity, creative outcomes. So I hope that there was some avenues of interest there. It's a little not the norm for me to be talking and not have the chance to talk back or have those folks of you respond back to me. But I do want to encourage you to, again, put some questions, any questions you have, in the box at this time. We do have a few that already have been in there. And I'll answer what you have in terms of this topic. And if we have time left over, if you have any specific Villanova questions, happy to answer that too. Okay, so as a manager, what can I do? Here's a question number one. As a manager, what can I do to encourage creative thinking among my employees? Well, I do think we talked about a lot of these topics. I think that one of the things is just setting the expectation. How often have you been in a meeting where you are really soliciting creative ideas? You know, we're faced with, first of all, there's so much of my time, I'm sure your time, that is spent just putting out fires, that you do need to put aside some time to really think deeply about what's next, being creative, coming up with new ideas. But putting that in front of your employees or those folks that work with you where you say, we have this issue and we are really encouraging creative ideas, sometimes devoid of any resource constraints. So let's start with, this is analogous to a brainstorming session. Let's not for a moment focus on what can't be done, but let's think about what can be done. Sometimes I categorize people into two different kinds of people. There are can-do people and there are can't-do people. And I think we all enjoy working with the can-do people, people that believe just about anything can be accomplished. And so I think setting those expectations, asking for ideas, and discussing them in an open format, being transparent, and having this type of dialogue will help set those kinds of expectations. Okay. Next question. What do you think will be the newest, latest disruptive technology? Any cool examples? I thought I gave cool examples already, but that's my first smart alecky answer to this. The second one is, if I knew, I would probably quit my day job and I would be living on an island somewhere. But that being said, I think there are just so many examples of disruptive technology. One of my favorites that we talk about when I teach this in classes is our video games. And maybe even now it's already a dated example, but if you think about the 14, 15, and 16-year-old boy who are the power users of video games, they scoffed at the Wii, the Nintendo Wii, when it came out. The graphics were weak, controllers were simple, the games were silly, but that Wii technology was good enough for grandmothers and parents and a whole different generation that never even thought about, they thought that their video game playing days were behind them. But yet that Wii was an amazing success. The marketplace of 14, 15, and 16-year-old kids is very limited, but the marketplace for anyone above that age to do exercises, to play guitar, to do whatever have you, was vast, and that technology was disruptive because while it was inferior and wasn't a sustaining technology, it wasn't an incremental approval on Halo or Call of Duty, it was amazingly good enough for the vast majority of the marketplace, and was incredibly, incredibly successful. So that's one cool example, I would say, but there are many, many others. What feedback do you hear about Villanova grads as it relates to creativity? This is such a great question, and it gives me a chance to give a bit of a commercial, I guess. Our success at Villanova. We would all agree there's been incredible success at Villanova. The intellectual capacity of our students continues to rise. It is just an amazing pool of individuals that we get on this campus every year. We're incredibly blessed in that regard. But as we become stronger and more like an Ivy League school, the path that one must walk as a kid to get to Villanova becomes very prescribed, very much like walking down a tunnel. You must take the certain courses in high school. You must have certain service experiences. You must take a particular SAT prep class. You must write an essay a certain way. So it is our students, in order to get to Villanova, are sometimes put in a box. And so it's our opportunity, it's our challenge, it's what we need to do to break open that box when they're here. So that is sometimes a challenge. So we make it so prescribed what you need to do to get here, but then when we get here, we have to enable our students the opportunity to cut their teeth on problem solving or thinking differently or coming up with a new answer. I often say that creativity is the most difficult thing to do sometimes in a room, is to be the one who has a different idea. So if you're in a room of 20 people and you're thinking differently than the other 19, it takes guts to go against the status quo or to go against those other 19 people. So we try to provide an opportunity here in the warm and safe environment of campus where you can go against others in the room, where you get to learn and you cut your teeth on giving countervailing viewpoints or going against the status quo and having experiences that you get to bring to bear. So that's an important aspect of what we do at Villanova, and in particular what we focus on here at the business school. And that is a challenge because the students come to us. Many of them are from similar backgrounds, although we have vastly increased diversity on campus. It is still the case that we need to break the box when they get here and allow people to expand and become creative in their own right. Okay. How do you break through a conservative organization where ideas are dismissed? This is an excellent question, and I'm not even sure I have a great answer for it. But I would tell you that somebody described to me one time higher ed, so my very own industry, as analogous to operating in peanut butter. And so higher ed has not been a place that is apt to change. And so we're quite a conservative organization. And it took some time, but the culture here, because of the ICE Center, in large part, those programs, and individuals who believe in this notion of creativity, there really is a new tenor on campus, a new openness to creativity. And the ICE Center pulled in people from the fine arts, from computer science, from engineering, from environmental sciences, and we have developed programs in and out of the classroom where people are encouraged to come up with new ideas. And so but it took time, and in fact, it took a very targeted strategy. When we founded the ICE Center, the only formal mechanism through which creativity was taught was in some of our entrepreneurship courses, which were given to juniors and seniors. So one of the first things I did was started some initiatives at the freshman and sophomore year. So those juniors and seniors who were sort of drinking the Kool-Aid about entrepreneurial thinking were no sooner getting that and they were graduating and leaving our campus. So there was not much of a cultural shift. But getting folks early and often, students early and often, around the idea of creativity when they're just starting as freshmen. We have required assignments for all the freshmen in the business school and all the freshmen in engineering that focus on innovation and creativity. All freshmen in both those colleges go through those exercises. We started a course in innovation and creativity open to all freshmen. And that has built a culture such that our entrepreneurship competition 5 years ago had 12 teams in it. This past year there were 77 teams in our entrepreneurship competition. It culminated in a day where we had over 500 alumni, students, and others that participated in the entrepreneurship competition, the design course in engineering, the entrepreneurship final project presentations in our entrepreneurship minor, the mobile apps course. It was truly a celebration. We call it Pitch Day, and it is truly a celebration of creative problem solving. One or two more, I'm being told. Okay, let me cherry pick one of these. What's the best way to convey your creativity in a job search or interview? How do you find a company that values your creative thinking? This is a really important question. We used to spend, when we founded the ICE Center, we built out a really interesting advisory council of about 35 individuals that had very creative positions. Some of them were chief innovation officers. Some had been in startups. Some were Silicon Valley folks. And we spent a lot of time talking about this. You know, if we are truly believing that we're developing creative problem solvers here at Villanova, how do they articulate that in the job market? And the best thing that I think we came up with, it sounds so simple in retrospect, is having there's two things really. One is talking about yourself in terms of being creative. So using something, you know, I believe that I come up with creative solutions. I shared with you at the beginning of this presentation, that's what firms are explicitly looking for. The CEOs, the IBM survey, all of it talks about creative problem solving. And so talking about yourself that way, too many of our students will say, I'm not creative or I'm not entrepreneurial, and then you'll scratch below the surface and you'll find out that they ran the Special Olympics weekend on campus and came up with this great idea to increase the impact or to do things in a better way. And so if we really think about your life, you can always come up with examples of where you've been innovative. So I think the best thing to do as an interview is to be very explicit about that. I am someone, you know, I believe that I am very able and capable of coming up with creative solutions to existing problems. And let me give you an example of when I did that and to provide that example. I think that is a very powerful thing to do in an explicit fashion in an interview. And those of you who interview people, you would probably share with me that you don't hear that in an interview. You hear it in a much different way where somebody might tell you the story, but they don't frame it for you as being an example of being entrepreneurial or being creative. So that's the best answer I can give you there. Do we have time for one more or other types of questions? Are there any other types of questions that we want to tackle? One more. Any questions about Villanova? I heard the basketball team's going to be terrific this year. I've had the chance to meet with Jay. He's very excited, as am I. So hopefully our preseason rankings look amazing. We are fortunate to have such a great basketball team. It helps so much on the academic side, and so we're grateful to our basketball program and all our sports. But the national presence of the basketball team really does help drive attention and awareness across the country for our academic programs, and vice versa. We've had a great partnership with the athletics programs and VSB students. Any other last questions? One more. Can you speak to the political skill needed to move an idea through an organization? Speak to it, but I think it is truly that. There's a reason that people talk about championing and why I say entrepreneurship is taking action. I think that consensus building here on campus has been, and transparency and an openness to others' ideas has really played well for us when we launched the ICE Center. And that was a new idea because it was a business school initiative, but yet the mandate of the center was university-wide, and we were very sincere in our belief that it should be university-wide, but also our desire to engage individuals from, we've had ICE Center programming where we've done improv with the chair, Father Cregan, the chair of the theater department, or where we've brought in artists or visited museums. So it's very much a cross-functional idea, and so getting out and about, there's no substitute in my opinion for the personal meeting. So in this age of, and this is a bigger story than I can share here, but it's been an amazing thing to me, the extent to which jobs that I would have previously thought were completely quantitative or number crunching on Wall Street or where have you, and then the amount to which the individual I speak to at those firms want people who can talk to one another. So interpersonal skills, having face-to-face meetings, I think there's just no substitute politically. Being transparent, being sincere, and open. Those are the political skills. So if those are political skills, I think that those are the ones you need. I think obviously there's a level of savvy that you must have in order to move ideas through. But getting out and about and pressing the flesh, there's no substitute. Is there anything else? Well, in closing, I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to tell you that I think sometimes I have the best job in the world, and in large part it's because of all the support and the welcome that I receive from our alumni. I think our alumni are amazing individuals. They are a true differentiator that I am proud to talk about when we have potential students and their parents here. It is the reason why last year we had 99.7% of VSB students had jobs within 6 months of graduation. It was because our alumni and the desire of Villanovans to help Villanovans is unrivaled. So I'm very grateful on behalf of our students, but also personally for making me love my job so much and for welcoming me into the Villanova community. So thank you for joining me, and I hope to see many of you in person in the future. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie. Thank you.
All right, everyone, so that concludes our webinar. Thank you again to Dean Maggitti, and thank you to all who have participated. If you would like to continue the conversation, please register and log in to our virtual networking event, which will begin promptly at 1:00 p.m. If you need the link, it is on the Villanova LinkedIn page as well as the webinar registration page on the alumni website. Additionally, on those platforms, a recording of today's webinar will soon be available. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, and please join us for future professional development activities. Details will be on our website and on the LinkedIn page. Thank you again, Dean Maggitti, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.